easy now. Let me help you. You're safe with me.
A jagged, desperate whine echoed through the cellar as the beast pressed itself against the cold stone floor. The creature was a monster of legend, yet right now, it was just a terrified, whimpering pup. Nora knelt, discarding her iron dagger. She reached out with bare, trembling hands, offering only warmth to the feral creature that could easily snap her wrist. As she began to hum a soft, ancient lullaby, the cub's golden eyes slowly closed, leaning into her palm. She had no idea that just beyond the frosted glass of her window, the most feared predator in the realm, the Alpha King himself, was watching her every move, his heart stopping at the sight. The winter of 1492 had been unforgiving in the border village of Alder's Crossing. The frost bit through the timber walls, but it was the fear that truly froze the blood of the villagers. Beyond the tree line lay the Howling Peaks, a territory strictly forbidden to mankind, ruled by the Lycans. For centuries, a fragile, bloody treaty had kept the humans and the wolf shifters apart. But lately, the borders had blurred. Nora Caldwell, the village's outcast apothecary, dragged her heavy wool cloak tighter around her shoulders as she trudged through the knee-deep snow. She had been exiled to a small cabin on the very edge of the woods after her father, a disgraced physician named Simon Caldwell, passed away. The villagers only sought her out when the village priest, Father Tobias, could not pray their ailments away. It was dusk when she heard it, a sound that was not quite a child's cry, yet not entirely an animal's whine. It was a jagged, desperate gasp, echoing from a thicket of dead brambles. Nora froze, her hand instinctively gripping the small carving knife at her belt. The laws of Mayor Winslow were absolute. Any villager caught associating with the wolves of the peaks would be hanged for treason. Yet, the healer in her blood overrode the fear in her mind. She pushed through the thorny branches, the sharp wood tearing at her skirts. There, lying in a pool of its own crimson blood, was a wolf cub. Its fur was a striking, unusual shade of midnight blue, matted with mud and gore. Protruding from its hind leg was the unmistakable silver-fletched shaft of a poacher's bolt. Silver, the ultimate poison to their kind. The cub bared its razor-sharp teeth, emitting a high-pitched, rattling snarl. It was terrified, backed against a rotting oak stump, fighting the venom that was currently burning through its veins. "Shh," Nora whispered, her breath blooming in white clouds in the freezing air. "I am not going to hurt you. If I leave you here, Garrett and his hunters will find you. They will skin you for a handful of copper." She didn't know if the beast could understand human speech in this form, but she dropped to her knees, abandoning her knife in the snow. She needed both hands. Slowly, deliberately, she removed her thick woolen mittens. The cub snapped its jaws, missing her fingers by an inch. "I know it hurts," she murmured, her voice steadying. She remembered her father's old texts, specifically the heavily guarded Anatomy of the Cursed by an old monk named Brother Hammond. She knew how silver reacted to them. It was like acid. Nora began to hum. It was a wordless, melodic tune her mother used to sing a song of harvest and warm hearths. She pushed her fear down, projecting only a calm, maternal aura. She inched closer, her hand extended. The cub's golden eyes, dilated with agony, locked onto hers. It growled again, but the sound hitched into a whimper. When her warm fingers brushed the icy fur of its neck, the creature flinched, but it did not bite. "There," she breathed. "There. Now." With swift, practiced precision, she scooped the heavy, bleeding creature into her cloak, pressing it against her chest to hide it from any prying eyes, and hurried back to her cabin. Once inside her cellar, lit only by a single sputtering tallow candle, the real work began. The cub thrashed as she laid it on her wooden work table. Nora gathered her supplies, a pair of iron tongs, clean linen, a bowl of hot water, and a jar of crushed king's foil and white willow bark. "Hold still, little one," she pleaded softly. She wrapped her left arm over the cub's chest, pinning it gently but firmly, and with her right hand, she gripped the silver bolt with the tongs. 1, 2, 3. She yanked. The cub let out a deafening, piercing howl that rattled the glass jars on her shelves. Blood spurted, black and poisoned. The cub snapped its jaws wildly, its teeth sinking into the fleshy part of Nora's forearm. Nora gasped in pain, tears springing to her eyes, but she did not pull away. She did not strike the beast. Instead, she resumed her humming, her voice shaking, ignoring the blood running down her own arm. She quickly packed the smoking wound with the king's foil paste, binding it tightly with the linen. "It's done," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's over." Slowly, the cub released her arm. It looked up at her, a profound intelligence swimming in its golden eyes. Exhausted by the silver poison and the trauma, the cub laid its heavy head on her uninjured hand, letting out a soft sigh, and drifted into a healing sleep. Nora collapsed into a wooden chair, clutching her bleeding arm, breathing heavily in the dim light. What she did not know was that she was not alone. Outside her window, standing in the blizzard, a colossal figure remained perfectly still. He was a monster of myth, standing nearly 7 feet tall in his lichen form, his fur the color of crushed obsidian. King Tristan, of the Silvermane pack, watched through the frost-rimmed glass. Tristan had tracked his little brother's scent for 2 days. Prince Finnick had wandered too close to the human borders and had been ambushed. Tristan had come with his royal guard, intending to slaughter every living soul in Alder's Crossing for daring to spill royal blood. He had found the blood trail in the snow, expecting to find his brother dead and mutilated by human hands. Instead, he found this. Tristan's massive claws had been digging into the wood of Nora's cabin, ready to tear the wall down and rip the human female's throat out. But when she discarded her weapon, when she took the bite without retaliation, when she sang the poison out of his brother's veins, the Alpha King's rage faltered. He stared at the human woman, watching her bandage her own wound with shaking hands while gently stroking his brother's sleeping head. A strange, violent possessiveness gripped Tristan's chest. His golden eyes, glowing in the dark winter night, locked onto her fragile. The scent of her lavender, rain, and the metallic tang of her blood hit his enhanced senses, searing itself into his brain. Mine, the beast inside him rumbled, a primal decree that shook the very foundations of his soul. Tristan stepped back into the shadows of the falling snow, his mind racing. He could not simply take his brother and leave. Not now. 1. The morning sun cast a pale, weak light over Alder's Crossing. Nora awoke with a stiff neck, having slept in the wooden chair beside the work table. She immediately checked the cub. He was still breathing, his fever broken, curled into a tight, blue-black ball on an old woolen blanket. She quickly changed his bandages, gave him a bowl of watered-down goat's milk, and locked the heavy oak cellar door behind her. She had to open her apothecary. If she didn't show her face in the village, Mayor Winslow would send the guards to investigate her absence. The bell above her shop door chimed just before noon. Nora emerged from the back room, wiping powdered feverfew from her apron. "Welcome. How may I?" The words died in her throat. Standing in the center of her cramped, fragrant shop was a man who looked like he had stepped out of a violent, beautiful painting. He was impossibly tall, his broad shoulders seeming to fill the entire room. He wore a heavy cloak of dark fur over an impeccably tailored doublet of black leather and silver embroidery. His hair was dark and slightly wavy, falling around a face carved with aristocratic, harsh lines. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. They were a piercing, striking amber. "Good morrow," the man said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that sent a strange shiver down Nora's spine. It sounded like the rumble of distant thunder. "Good morrow, my lord," Nora managed, averting her eyes and curtsying slightly. "I am Nora Caldwell. Are you in need of a remedy?" "You could say that," the man replied, stepping closer. He moved with a terrifying grace, completely silent despite his size. "I am Lord Tristan. I am a traveler from the northern estates. I was told you are the finest healer in this modest settlement." "The only healer, my lord. Father Tobias prefers prayer to poultices," Nora said, trying to steady her racing heart. There was an intense heat radiating off this man, an energy that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She noticed his gaze drop to her left forearm, where the thick linen bandage was hidden beneath her sleeve. "I have an affliction," Tristan lied smoothly, his amber eyes never leaving her face. He inhaled deeply, secretly savoring the scent of her up close. She smelled exactly as she had last night. "A lack of sleep, a restlessness in the blood. I can brew a tincture of valerian root and chamomile," Nora offered, turning toward her shelves to put some distance between them. She felt like a deer trapped in the gaze of a hunting hawk. "Tell me, Nora," Tristan said, the sound of his own name on his lips sending a jolt through her. "What do the people of this village think of the wolves in the peaks?" Nora paused, a glass vial hovering mid-air. Her blood turned to ice. Did he know? Had someone seen her carrying the cub? They fear them, my lord," she answered carefully, resuming her task. The mayor has placed a heavy bounty on their pelts. Garrett, the chief hunter, claims they are mindless monsters. And what do you think? Tristan asked, stepping right behind her. She could feel the warmth of his chest against her back. Nora closed her eyes, the image of the terrified, bleeding cub flashing in her mind. I think, she whispered, turning to face him, forced to look up into his striking face, that any creature capable of feeling pain is not mindless. I think men are often quicker to monster than beasts. Tristan's pupils dilated. The raw honesty in her voice, the fierce spark in her hazel eyes, struck him harder than any physical blow. He wanted to reach out, to trace the line of her jaw, to claim her right then and there, but his sharp hearing caught the sound of heavy boots crunching in the snow outside. Many of them. The shop door burst open, the bell clattering violently against the glass. Mayor Winslow, a portly man with a face red from cold and cheap wine, marched in, followed by Garrett. Garrett was a vile, cruel-looking man holding a heavy crossbow, a string of freshly killed rabbits hanging from his belt. Nora Caldwell, Mayor Winslow barked, ignoring the imposing noble standing in the room. We are conducting a search of all outermost properties. A search? Nora's heart plummeted into her stomach. For what cause, Mayor? Someone broke into the armory last night and stole medical supplies, Garrett sneered, stepping forward, his muddy boots tracking dirt onto Nora's clean floor. And coincidentally, my men tracked a blood trail from the woods, leading straight toward your property line. A wolf's blood trail. Nora's face drained of color. I have stolen nothing, and there are no wolves here. We'll see about that, Garrett said, pushing past her toward the back door that led to her living quarters and the cellar. Tristan stepped into Garrett's path. The movement was so fast, it was barely a blur. Suddenly, the massive lord was standing shoulder to shoulder with the hunter, looking down at him with an expression of cold, terrifying disdain. The lady stated, "She has nothing," Tristan said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a vibrating, guttural quality. Are the manners of Alder's Crossing so poor that you barge into a woman's home without warrant? Garrett bristled, lifting his chin. Step aside, fancy lord. This is official village business. If she's harboring a beast, she hangs before sunset. Nora's breath hitched. She looked at Tristan, silently pleading with him not to intervene, not to get himself killed by the hunter's crossbow. But Tristan merely smiled, a sharp, chilling expression that did not reach his eyes. Proceed, then, Tristan said, stepping aside smoothly. He shot a barely perceptible glance at Nora, a look that told her to trust him. Garrett scoffed and kicked the back door open, leading 2 guards into Nora's home. Nora felt faint. The cellar door was locked, but a lock wouldn't stop Garrett. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the shout of discovery, waiting for the heavy footsteps, dragging the cub upstairs. Instead, 5 minutes later, Garrett emerged, his face purple with frustration. Nothing, Garrett spat, looking at the mayor. Just jars of rotting weeds and old books. The cellar is empty, save for some moldy potatoes. Nora blinked, utterly bewildered. Empty? That was impossible. She had just seen the cub an hour ago. Tristan smirked, adjusting his fur cloak. As I said, a waste of time. Mayor Winslow grumbled an apology to the lord and ordered his men out. As the door slammed shut behind them, Nora leaned against the counter, her legs shaking uncontrollably. She looked at Tristan, her mind spinning. How? She whispered. Magic is not entirely lost to this world, Nora Caldwell, Tristan said softly. He reached out, his large, calloused thumb gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch sent a cascade of electricity through her veins. Your secret is safe. But you are not. They will be back. Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and walked out the door, disappearing into the crowded, snowy street, leaving Nora alone, with a heart that was beating much too fast. 2 days passed. The tension in Alder's Crossing grew thick enough to cut with a blade. The missing wolf cub had vanished from Nora's cellar, spirited away, she assumed, by whatever dark magic Lord Tristan possessed. She hadn't seen the mysterious nobleman since. But Garrett had not let the matter rest. The hunter had found something else in the snow near Nora's cabin. A piece of torn linen, stained with black, poisoned blood, and sprinkled with crushed kingsfoil. It was the bandage Nora had discarded during the surgery. On the evening of the 3rd day, the mob came. Nora was reading by the fire when the front door of her cabin was practically ripped from its hinges. Men with torches and pitchforks flooded her tiny home. Garrett led the charge, his face twisted in a victorious sneer. "Grab the witch!" Garrett roared. Rough hands seized Nora, dragging her from her chair. She screamed, fighting wildly, kicking and scratching, but there were too many of them. They hauled her out into the freezing night, tossing her into the snow-packed square in the center of the village. The entire town had gathered. In the center of the square, a heavy wooden post had been erected, surrounded by bundles of dry kindling. Nora Caldwell, Mayor Winslow announced from a makeshift wooden podium, his voice echoing over the angry murmurs of the crowd. You stand accused of high treason. Evidence has been found proving you treated a creature of the Howling Peaks. You have conspired with the enemy. I am a healer, Nora cried out, struggling against the ropes that two burly guards were currently using to bind her to the wooden post. It was just a child, a wounded animal. It was a lichen, Garrett shouted, holding up the bloody herb-stained linen for the crowd to see. She used human medicine to save a beast that would rip our throats out. She is a traitor and a witch. Burn her, someone in the crowd yelled. The chant was quickly picked up. Burn the witch! Burn her! Tears streamed down Nora's face, freezing on her cheeks. She looked at the faces of the people she had treated. Old Mrs. Higgins, whose arthritis she had soothed. Thomas, the baker, whose son she had cured of winter fever. They all looked back at her with a terrifying, bloodthirsty hatred. Garrett grabbed a blazing torch from a bystander. He stepped up to the kindling at Nora's feet. Any last words, traitor? You are the monster, Garrett, Nora spat, lifting her chin defiantly despite the terror consuming her. I know it was your silver arrow. Garrett laughed darkly. And a rich reward I'll get for it from the southern packs, once this war starts. He lowered the torch toward the dry wood. Crack. The sound was like a thunderclap, followed instantly by a shock wave of raw, suffocating pressure that dropped half the villagers to their knees. The wind howled, extinguishing the torches in the immediate vicinity. From the shadows of the village hall, a figure emerged. It was Lord Tristan. But he was no longer hiding his true nature. His eyes were glowing a brilliant, terrifying amber, illuminating the darkness. A low, bone-rattling growl vibrated from his chest, a sound so deep it made the snow on the rooftops avalanche to the ground. Who dares? Garrett stammered, pulling his crossbow and aiming it at Tristan. Stay back, Lord, or I'll shoot you too. Tristan didn't even flinch. He continued his slow, predatory walk toward the pyre. As he moved, the air around him seemed to warp. His bones cracked audibly, reshaping, elongating. The fine velvet and leather of his clothes tore away as thick, midnight black fur erupted from his skin. Screams pierced the night air. The villagers scrambled backward, trampling each other in their desperation to flee. Before their eyes, the nobleman transformed into a monstrous, 7-foot-tall lichen. He was a creature of nightmares, muscled and deadly, with claws like iron scythes. But it was the silver crown of braided metal resting atop his massive wolfen brow that made Mayor Winslow wet his trousers. The king, Father Tobias gasped, dropping his rosary into the snow. God save us, it is the Alpha King. Garrett panicked and fired his crossbow. The silver bolt flew true, striking Tristan square in the chest. The massive beast barely paused. With a casual flick of his claw, Tristan snapped the bolt in half and pulled it from his thick pectoral muscle. The wound hissed, but healed almost instantly, his alpha blood burning the silver away. Tristan lunged. He moved faster than human eyes could track. In a fraction of a second, he had Garrett pinned to the ground, his massive jaws clamped just millimeters from the hunter's throat. Garrett sobbed, a pathetic, high-pitched sound of absolute terror. Tristan let out a deafening roar, a command that forced every remaining human in the square to press their faces into the snow in submission. Then, the king shifted back. He stood naked in the snow, completely unfazed by the cold, his amber eyes burning with murderous intent as he looked down at Garrett. You shot my brother with poisoned silver, Tristan spoke, his voice booming across the silent, terrified square. You sought to ignite a war for coin, and then you sought to burn the woman who saved his life. Tristan turned his gaze to Nora, who was still tied to the post, wide-eyed and trembling. His expression softened infinitesimally. He walked over to her. With one swipe of his razor-sharp claws, he severed the thick ropes binding her. Nora slumped forward, and Tristan caught her, pulling her against his bare, searingly hot chest. He wrapped his own discarded, massive fur cloak around her shivering shoulders. You are unharmed? He whispered, his voice solely for her, filled with a frantic, desperate need for confirmation. Nora nodded numbly, staring up at the terrifying, beautiful king of the north. You are the wolf. I am Tristan, he replied, his thumb brushing away a frozen tear from her cheek. "And you, Nora Caldwell, are coming with me." Tristan turned back to the groveling villagers. "Hear me, humans of Alder's Crossing. This woman is under the protection of the Silvermane Crown. If so much as a hair on her head is harmed, I will return with an army of 10,000, and I will leave no stone standing. Do we understand each other?" Mayor Winslow, trembling violently, nodded his head against the snow. "Yes, Your Majesty." "As for you," Tristan looked down at Garrett, his eyes flashing wolf gold. "Your punishment will not be so quick." From the shadows of the woods, two more massive lichens stepped forward. Between them, holding onto their thick fur, was a young boy with midnight blue hair, Prince Finnick. He looked at Nora and smiled brightly, waving a small hand. Tristan scooped Nora up into his arms, as if she weighed nothing more than a feather. "Take the hunter to the dungeons of the peaks," Tristan commanded his guards. Without another word, the Alpha King carried the human healer out of the village, stepping into the dark, frozen woods, leaving the world she knew behind, and carrying her toward a destiny that would change the Lichen Kingdom forever. The journey into the Howling Peaks was a blur of biting frost and terrifying speeds. Tristan carried Nora through the treacherous mountain passes as easily as if she were made of gossamer and light. Despite the freezing temperatures, Nora felt no cold. The Alpha King's body radiated a fierce, unnatural heat, shielding her entirely from the winter's wrath. When they finally broke through the tree line at dawn, Nora gasped. She had expected to be dragged into a feral, blood-soaked cave. Instead, towering before her was the Obsidian Keep, a majestic fortress of black stone and soaring turrets carved directly into the mountain's face. It rivaled the architectural marvels of the great southern capitals. Banners of midnight blue and silver whipped in the fierce wind, and massive iron gates swung open in silent obedience as their king approached. Inside, the keep was a marvel of warmth and sophisticated engineering. Great hearths blazed with pine logs, and the halls were lined with tapestries depicting the ancient, forgotten histories of the realm. Lichens in their human forms walked the corridors, dressed in fine velvets and thick furs. They stopped and bowed deeply as Tristan passed, though their keen golden eyes lingered on the human woman trembling in his arms. "You are safe here, Nora," Tristan murmured, setting her down gently in a grand chamber dominated by a massive four-poster bed and a roaring fireplace. "No human law can reach you now. You are under the absolute protection of the crown." "But I am human," Nora replied, clutching his heavy cloak around her shoulders. "Your people, they look at me with suspicion. They smell the enemy on my skin." "They smell my scent on your skin," Tristan corrected, his amber eyes darkening with an intense, possessive emotion that made Nora's breath hitch. "And they know better than to question their king. Rest now. I have matters to attend to regarding the traitor, Garrett." For the next several weeks, Nora lived a surreal existence within the Obsidian Keep. The young Prince Finnick became her constant shadow, trailing after her through the vast libraries and indoor botanical gardens. She discovered that the lichens possessed incredible texts on medicine and history, some authored by figures from human history whose true natures had been kept secret. She read ancient journals penned by a physician named Lord Thomas Cromwell, detailing the anatomical differences between humans and shifters, realizing with shock that the supernatural world had always been quietly embedded within human high society to ensure their survival. Yet, beneath the luxurious surface of the winter court, a deadly political undercurrent churned. Not all lichens welcomed a human into their sacred sanctuary. The most vocal opposition came from Lord Charles Brandon and his fiercely ambitious wife, Lady Margaret. They were purebloods from the Eastern Territories, wealthy and deeply prejudiced against humanity. Margaret had spent years grooming her own daughter, Catherine, to be Tristan's queen. The sudden arrival of a human female, one upon whom the Alpha King showered unprecedented attention, was a direct threat to their royal ambitions. "She is a spy, my king," Lord Charles boldly declared one evening during a war council in the Great Hall. Nora listened from the shadows of the gallery above. "The Treaty of the Silver Moon explicitly forbids humans from crossing the peaks. By harboring her, you invite war with the southern human kingdoms." Tristan sat upon his throne of carved ironwood, his expression unreadable. "She saved my brother's life, Charles. She demonstrated a loyalty and courage that your own border patrols lacked when Finnick was ambushed." "She is a pet," Lady Margaret sneered, stepping forward, her eyes flashing a dangerous yellow, a fragile, fleeting mortal. "She does not belong in the Winter Court, and she certainly does not belong at the side of the Alpha King. She dilutes our strength." "My strength," Tristan rumbled, the sound vibrating through the stone floor. Is not for you to measure. Margaret, Nora Caldwell remains. That is my final word. But a king's word, Nora soon learned, was not always enough to stop the machinations of a jealous court. 3 nights later, Nora was working late in the keep's apothecary, grinding dry-eyed white willow bark to soothe Finnick's aching leg, which still troubled him in the damp cold. A servant girl entered quietly, placing a silver goblet of warm, spiced wine on the wooden table. "Compliments of Lady Margaret, my lady," the servant whispered, avoiding Nora's eyes before scurrying out of the room. Nora paused. She looked at the steam rising from the goblet. The aroma of cinnamon and clove was strong, but beneath it, Nora's expertly trained nose caught something else, a faint, earthy scent, bitter, like crushed almonds and damp soil. Aconity, wolfsbane, a fatal poison to lichens, but equally deadly to humans in high enough doses. Nora did not drink. Instead, she dipped a silver stirring spoon into the wine. The metal instantly tarnished, turning a sickly, bruised black. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Margaret was not trying to scare her. She was trying to assassinate her. And she was using a poison that would make it look as though Nora, the apothecary, had accidentally contaminated her own drink, or worse, that she had been brewing wolfsbane to use against the pack. Before Nora could decide what to do, the heavy oak door of the apothecary swung open. Lady Margaret stepped in, her lips curled into a victorious, cruel smile. "Drinking alone, human?" Margaret purred, locking the door behind her. "I prefer the company of my books to the company of assassins," Nora replied evenly, keeping the table between them. "Wolfsbane, Lady Margaret? It is a sloppy choice. The scent is overpowering if you know what to look for." Margaret's smile vanished, replaced by a snarl that distorted her beautiful features. "You clever little rat, it matters not. If you will not drink it, I will simply tear your throat out and tell the king I caught you brewing poison for him." Margaret lunged across the room, her fingernails elongating into lethal curved claws. Nora threw a handful of powdered pepper and dried nettle directly into Margaret's face. The pure blood howled in pain, blinded and coughing as her sensitive olfactory glands were overwhelmed. Nora scrambled backward, knocking over a shelf of glass vials to create an obstacle, but she was no match for a lichen's speed. Margaret recovered in seconds. She leaped over the broken glass, pinning Nora to the stone wall, her claws digging into the soft flesh of Nora's shoulders. "You will die tonight, human," Margaret hissed, her fangs fully extended, aiming for Nora's neck. Smash. The heavy oak door was not just opened, it was obliterated. It exploded inward, reduced to splinters by a force of pure, cataclysmic violence. Tristan stood in the doorway. He was not in his human form. He was fully shifted, a towering, nightmarish beast of obsidian fur and glowing, murderous eyes. The sheer aura of his alpha dominance slammed into the room like a physical shockwave. Margaret froze, whimpering as the primal instinct to submit to her king forced her to her knees. She released Nora, pressing her forehead against the glass-covered floor in absolute terror. Tristan did not hesitate. He crossed the room in a single bound, grabbing Margaret by the scruff of her neck and throwing her across the room. She smashed against the stone wall with a sickening crack, collapsing in a heap. The Alpha King turned to Nora. His massive, blood-stained chest heaved. Seeing the bleeding scratches on her shoulders, a sound ripped from his throat, a sound of such profound agony and rage that it made the very foundations of the keep tremble. He shifted back to his human form in an instant, heedless of his lack of clothing, and pulled Nora into a desperate, crushing embrace. "Are you harmed? Tell me you are not harmed," he demanded, his voice cracking, his hands roaming frantically over her face and arms to check for fatal wounds. "I am fine, Tristan," Nora gasped, wrapping her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest. "She tried to poison me with wolfsbane. When I realized it, she attacked." The keep's guards, alerted by the noise, flooded the room, followed closely by a horrified lord, Charles Brandon. "My king!" Charles cried, seeing his wife broken and bleeding on the floor. "What is the meaning of this?" Tristan turned slowly, keeping Nora firmly tucked against his side. His amber eyes burned with a fire that promised death. "Your wife attempted to murder my fated mate." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The guards gasped. Lord Charles went pale, dropping to his knees. "Mate?" Nora whispered, looking up at him in shock. In all the texts she had read, a mate was the other half of a lycan's soul, a bond forged by the heavens, unbreakable and eternal. But humans could not be mates to lycans. It was unheard of. "From the moment I smelled your blood in the snow, Nora," Tristan said softly, looking down at her, his expression stripping away all the armor of the king to reveal the man beneath. "From the moment you took my brother's pain upon yourself, my soul recognized yours. You are mine. You have always been mine." He turned back to the room, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Lady Margaret is guilty of high treason against the crown. She will be stripped of her titles and banished to the dead wastes. Lord Charles, you will return to the Eastern Territories and remain there. If I see either of your faces in my court again, I will not be as merciful." The guards dragged the weeping Margaret away, and the room slowly cleared until only Nora and Tristan remained, the adrenaline fading. Nora's legs suddenly felt weak. Tristan caught her, lifting her effortlessly into his arms and carrying her back to his private chambers. He laid her on the massive bed, fetching a warm cloth to gently clean the scratches on her shoulders. "You should have told me," Nora said quietly, watching his focused, devastatingly handsome face as he tended to her wounds, "about the mating bond." "I was afraid you would run," Tristan confessed, his thumb tracing the line of her collarbone. "You were terrified of us, of me. I wanted to give you time to see that I am not just a monster of the peaks. I wanted you to choose me, Nora, not be forced by a magical bond." Nora reached up, her hand cupping his cheek. She felt the rough stubble of his jaw, the terrifying power simmering just beneath his skin, and the profound aching vulnerability in his golden eyes. She thought of her lonely life in Alder's Crossing, the constant fear of the villagers, the freezing nights. And then she looked at the king who had torn down his own laws to protect her, who looked at her as if she were the very sun in his sky. "I do not fear you, Tristan," she whispered, pulling him down until their lips were mere inches apart. "And I do not need magic to make my choice." When he kissed her, it was not the brutal conquest of a beast, but the tender, desperate surrender of a king. The bond snapped into place, a rush of golden warmth that flooded Nora's veins, tying her soul to his for eternity. The following spring, as the snows finally melted from the howling peaks, a new treaty was signed. Mayor Winslow of Alder's Crossing, trembling in his boots, signed a pact of eternal peace and trade with the Lycan Kingdom, overseen by the newly crowned queen. Nora Caldwell, the outcast human apothecary, sat upon a throne of ironwood beside her Alpha King. She had brought healing to a wounded cub, and in return, she had healed the heart of a king, uniting two warring worlds through a love that defied all the laws of nature. If you were captivated by Nora and Tristan's epic tale of forbidden love, political betrayal, and undeniable destiny, make sure to hit that like button. This story proves that true strength isn't about the sharpness of your claws, but the courage in your heart. What was your favorite twist in the Obsidian Keep? Did you guess that Lady Margaret was plotting against Nora? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your theories on what happens next in the Winter Court. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow fantasy romance lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, original stories of magic, alphas, and fated mates. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a new adventure.
Hi, my name is Mountain Confessions, the owner and manager of Mountain Confessions. After watching the video, she calmed the wolf cub, not knowing that the Alpha King was watching her. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the quiet kindness in that moment. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or gain attention. She simply reacted with patience and compassion toward a frightened creature. I think that's what made the scene feel so emotional. Sometimes the smallest actions reveal the deepest parts of someone's character, especially when no one believes they're being watched. Do you think the Alpha King was more affected by the way she treated the wolf cub, or by how naturally gentle and fearless she seemed? And why do you think stories about unexpected emotional connections resonate so strongly with people? I think stories like this remind us that kindness often leaves a stronger impression than power, status, or appearances ever could. If this story stayed with you emotionally, I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional Alpha King stories filled with loyalty, hidden connection, and heartfelt moments, feel free to like and subscribe, only if you'd like to see more.